Nerima Wako, Jiwa, Executive Director of Siasa Place. And we're now joined by Wanjiru Gikonyo, who's an advocate for good governance and accountability. Wanjiru, good morning.
Good morning, Eric. And good morning, Ndu. Good morning, City.
Good morning.
And Nerima.
And Nerima. We've been in recent conversations.
You feel like you've just seen her?
Yes. We've been in very recent conversations.
I came with you from the house.
From the house, yes. They just didn't realize.
They just didn't know.
And apologies for my tardiness.
No, it's all right. We forgive you.
Thank
That's
raining.
That's why
No,
accountability.
that's not why. That's not an excuse. We are praying for rain.
It's weather.
Yes.
See those people that you talk about on governance and accountability, when they give you an excuse next time, go be easy on them.
Yes, but let me say,
If they tell you we had promised to do this in 6 months, but unfortunately we couldn't do it.
Or when they tell you
Relax.
we've captured the state and we have a good reason,
Yes.
please understand.
understand
And
things,
that
things
Parliament
happen.
is
Things
important.
happen.
For a reason.
Suffice to say, I was saved by the expressway.
The same express.
The same one. How ironic. I tell you. And I have the it's ETC.
The ETC.
Yeah,
Yes, ETC.
Well. Okay.
We got co-opted.
Wanjiru, the conversation, that's what we were discussing earlier, has moved now into these political bipartisan talks that are expected to take place in Parliament. Following what the president asked his brother, Raila Odinga. And brother Raila Odinga said, I hear this. It's a very important message that has been sent by the president, not the president, by Mr. Ruto. And
Dr. Ruto.
he said Mr. Ruto.
Mr.
I
Dr.
see.
Ruto.
Yes.
He didn't say president, he said Mr. Ruto. And I listened to him, and we're going to have the conversation. The question is, the issues that the Azimio leadership were raising, cut from, electoral justice to good governance and formation of the government by the Kenya Kwanza administration into cost of living. Are all those things going to be addressed in these bipartisan parliamentary talks?
First of all, I think we need to to appreciate that President Ruto has agreed to talk. Uhuru Kenyatta did not until it was very late. Mwai Kibaki did not until Kofi Annan flew into the country. He has shown humility. He has shown statesman-like behavior in agreeing to dialogue. So one, that's a good thing. Now, will the real issues be addressed? They've been framed somewhat by the Azimio side, but let's remember, politicians will be politicians. And politicians will do what politicians do. You do not put a hyena to look after the chicks. You do not keep your dog, which is your pet, to look after your chicks or the kittens. You don't do that, because a hyena must look after its own interests. In the same way, our politicians will continue to look after their own interests. We have seen that with the Jubilee administration, we had state capture. We had the dynasties expropriating wealth from the economy for their own interests. We are seeing with this administration that the dynasty is being replaced by an oligarchy. They want to privatize state-owned enterprises. They want to remove parliament from that conversation. They want to capture institutions, because that's what politicians do. And we don't expect any better. In fact, it could get worse if that's possible. So where is the role of civil society? And I've had the conversations, and I agree with what you're saying. And I'll go back to a point that Nerima was making, that civic societies, not just the registered civil society, but civic societies have been part and parcel of driving the democratic agenda in Kenya, even before independence. We had civic societies organizing, whether it was the trade associations, political associations, organizing to ensure African representation in the colonial legislature of then. We had Africans again organizing to support the push for independence. In the 80s, we had civic societies organizing for multi-party democracy. In the 90s, we had civic societies, religious, civil societies, the academia, coming together with political parties to push for Moi to leave, the authoritarian regime to leave. Now, something happened around with the Constitution, which was part of the push, again, of civic societies. The Constitution brought in a constitutional dispensation, but it divided the civic societies. The religious group were not comfortable because of the issues of right to life, because of the issues there were issues around
Abortion,
the Catholic courts, the LGBTQ. So the religious took a very cold stance to the Constitution. Civil society, of course, went ahead very happy, has been trying to implement the Constitution, but the Constitution also decentralized power. And when you decentralize power, it means the little resources you have are spread all over. So I think civic societies have driven the democratic agenda in Kenya, and they continue to do so. Look at the court cases, whether it's the GMO case. That was the Peasants Association that put together a case to fight the state that is trying to capture the agricultural sector, because if you bring in GMOs in the wrong way, you're creating poverty. You're really just benefiting a few. We've had other cases that have come up. So civic society continues to be very vibrant in Kenya, whether it's the JA revolution that we're talking about, whether it's the Tatas, formal civil society, private sector, Kenya Association of Manufacturers suing government on unjust tax laws. So civic society is very active in Kenya and continues to protect our democracy against an avaricious political elite.
Let's look at what's happening.
But last point, civic societies are not organized at present around the national issues. And I think there's an agreement on what they are. If you look at the statement from the religious leaders, if you look at what is coming out even from the private sector, good governance, electoral governance, cost of living, all these we have agreement on that. So the question is, what will it take to bring civic societies together at this moment to deal with the political crisis that is facing our country?
Because this is exactly what you're saying, Wanjiru, in the sense that we have seen civil and civic society, putting people together, mushrooming people, advocating for your rights, getting people to be aware of the certain things that you should do, right? We saw Kenyans get riled up over the last 2.5 weeks. And we're not talking about a long time here. Over the last 2.5 weeks, people were vested in what was happening, whether it was the demonstrations on the other side, etc., etc. In their spaces, Kenyans have been taught, advocated to and for about the democratic process. So for something like this, that would either see peace or conflict in the country, why won't we see that same kind of riling up? Why won't it be very clear to us where the people's mandate is in this bipartisan committee, in this bipartisan talk that is happening? Why wouldn't it be so clear and evident at the snap of a finger that, okay, they're talking and we've been involved, then we should also be involved in this talking?
Of course we should be involved, but like Nerima said, where is the space? Because what happens is around the table where decisions are taken, the space has not been created. Now the civic societies, and I'll say civic societies because the formal civil society alongside the other associations need to fight for that space. Remembering that the IPPG, the CKRC were all fought for. Power is never given actually. No. You have to you have to take the power. In this case, we have to grab the power. So the question is, one, we're having a national dialogue. We are at it's a constitutional moment, as they say. We are going to redesign the state. And either civic society will be part of that conversation, or we are going to have the elite consensus designing this state for us. And if we do, we know they are going to dilute key provisions, because some of the problems that bedevil us, much as I have a lot of respect for Raila Odinga and his role in opposition and fighting for democracy in this country, but when you look at the role of the opposition in this country in terms of strengthening our electoral laws, in terms of strengthening leadership and accountability, they haven't done their part in parliament. They've been missing in action.
Not at all.
Exactly. So we have to fight for that space. But for that to happen, we need to come together. We need to agree. And now, I've been reflecting on this and thinking, what divides us? Because we agree on the mechanics, we agree on the technical issues. It's our values. And I think, and even through BBI and much as that was really a political process, very poorly designed, it was a process designed in capture, they were right in talking about the national ethos, because it's our values that we have to discuss. What matters to us as civil society, we are very clear. We're interested in a human rights-based approach to governance. We are interested in a pluralistic society. When we sit with religious leaders and we say pluralistic, they'll say, do you mean also LGBTQ? And we'll say yes. So how do we have a discussion with religious leaders and say, we have a common problem of failed governance in this country. We must discuss the values that bind us so that all Kenyans of whatever walk of life, ethnic, social orientation, religious affiliation are part of this nation of Kenya. And can we move together so that we get into this national dialogue and frame the real issues?
But Wanjiru, if you look at religious leaders in this country, they are a unified force. No. If you look at civil society, and you correctly put it, are they a unified force? No. So, when you say there are commonalities, there are things that people more or less have agreed on, is it that they have agreed on, or they've given these issues a nod and give the impression that they agree? Because if you agree, then your actions should indicate. But does that happen? The answer is no.
So, Siti, the point I'm making is that we are agreed that our governance is failing us. Because if you look at the statements that are made by whether it's the business community, now the religious, like the Catholic bishops made a statement just last week. They'll frame the same issues. They'll say, we don't want disorder, we don't want anarchy, we don't want politicians inciting citizens, we don't want, So we recognize broadly that we have a political and governance crisis. So the question is, and I agree, we are still fragmented as the civic societies. So the question is, how do we come together? And in my view, two things need to happen. We need a dialogue, because at this point, the only thing that will save this country is dialogue. And we need to recognize within civic societies, we must talk to each other. And we must discuss those things that divide us, and those are values. Whether if it's private sector, of course, wants good governance, but they are very profit-oriented. Where are they on human rights?
Do they really want good governance?
Where are they on human rights-based approaches? And yes, maybe where are they on governance? We need to come together. The second thing that needs to happen is we need to audit where we are. We've been implementing the Constitution for 13 years. The Constitution is born out of the National Accord. The National Accord framed the very issues that we have witnessed just these past 2 weeks. And I even wrote them down because I was looking at
agenda items.
Yes, it talked about elections, vote buying and selling, use of public resources in elections, public servants taking sides in elections, ballot stuffing, hate speech and ethnic sentiments, attacks on opposition, media bias. The issues that bedeviled us in 2007, many of them are still alive and well, and we have witnessed them very just in the past week. If you remember, the National Accord talked about a special tribunal around the post-election violence. Kenya then went into the ICC process, which was the option. I think we lost something when we went to ICC. We lost the opportunity for a national dialogue about why Kenyans would pick a machete and cut their neighbor.
Yeah.
We missed a national dialogue about these political leaders who pour money and buy those machetes and arm their citizens. And so there is a part of our history that we haven't owned, and it's becoming a living history, and we are repeating that cycle. So we need an audit and we need a dialogue. And I believe civic societies are the ones that will help this country, not our politicians.
It's true. We've got to begin by, first of all, acknowledging that our system has been captured by the political elite. Because this is what it is, and we were discussing it even earlier. Over time, politicians have made themselves the most important segment of our society in everything, you know. Even in those 90s, the opposition then had to work with the civic societies. They had to come in and work with the religious leaders in the civil society, and then that conversation had to happen. Have you seen politicians calling the civil society even for this maandamano now? Have you seen politicians calling the religious leaders and saying, okay, so how can we engage with the religious leaders, with the civic society, with the civil society, and say the issue of framing this issue of cost of living, let's push it this way? No, they actually deal with it by themselves. So politicians have captured this whole thing, and that's why they're comfortable saying we are going to have the conversation by ourselves in parliament, and we are going to craft this constitution and then grab the remaining power through the constitution and change that balance so that it's a political leadership. It's politicians that will be deciding how to govern us instead of us deciding how we want to be governed by the politicians. If we start by accepting that, and then now we start having a conversation and saying we can start by citizens can start by having their own conversation, parallel to this bipartisan.
You actually see the American hand in this, because where they are concerned, there's a huge separation between, say, church and state. It's not the case here. Our religion and religious groups are an integral part of what we do on a daily basis. And when we have conversations, religious leaders are involved, civil societies are involved. I mean, that's how our system works. But here, we can see this is a shift. Now, the moment you don't have voices that are not aligned to the political system, then, as Wanjiru likes saying, that whole process has been captured. Because it doesn't matter. Don't be fooled. Politicals on either side of the divide, same animal. There's no difference whatsoever.
Politicians will do what politicians do wherever they are, and I do agree that after the passage of the Constitution, something happened, and of necessity, the terrain shifted, power shifted. Kenya has then also become a lower middle income country.
We are not that low income thing. Please forgive me.
So
we are not a lower middle income country.
What happens is that our governance frame and our political terrain has shifted, and civic societies have also shifted. So I agree with you in part that civil society has not been framing the agenda like they did in the 80s, in the 90s. They were the ones framing the agenda. Right now, the national agenda is being framed by our political leaders. But part of this is because of what I said. The dispersal of power has seen civic societies also disperse themselves. So civic societies are framing agendas. And political parties...
Who's listening to the agenda?
No. I gave examples. When you look at the GMO debates, when you look which has been taken to court, there are issues even in parliament where you've had intervention of civil societies. Now, the point I was making is that civic societies are working in governance, are working even with political actors. It's at the national level that we are not visible, and we are not able to influence at this very high stakes position, because with the dispersal of power, because with our interests, different interests, we haven't recognized that we have a bigger enemy that requires us to come together, discuss and put our interests aside to save the country.
When will civil societies get it? That the reason why all this good work you do doesn't go anywhere is because you don't understand the one thing politicians do. Politicians get the people behind them. So even when they're misleading the people, but they are behind them. Civil society in this day and age seems to be this set of people, this group of people out there who from time to time take people to court, talk about things. That discussions of the civil society are extremely important. And they're the things that we actually need to actually spread to a much larger population.
That's true. If you remove the court system, if the judiciary is captured, as it will be if we continue this way, then the civil society
First of all,
Space.
I've really missed
It's
being around
muzzled.
this desk. But CTA does not mean you can lie to people that our initiatives go nowhere. The fact that
No,
we,
I
the
did
fact that
not
we
say
are
that.
here
I did not
talking and saying what we are saying means we have freedom of
Wanjiru.
speech,
Wanjiru.
freedom of expression. That is because civil society fought for it. So stop lying.
Okay.
Can we please count our gains
You know,
while
Wanjiru.
recognizing there is more
Okay.
to do?
I don't
I've
think
actually missed you. Wanjiru.
I don't think CT said that it's gone unnoticed. but
No,
all
he
right.
said it's gone nowhere.
I
I'm
don't
like,
think he said that.
excuse me, we're a
Nerima,
democratic
as
state.
you think about this, because this is the truth, that there was a time, in order for the label to be given as evil society, which you brought up, there was a time where the traction was felt in a very different manner. And it is clear that that is what is needed today to take this conversation that is happening at this level to this level and go from conversation then towards action. Because remember, when we talk about groups that influence the national discourse, religious organizations are seen as a group, one,
Yes.
united. Doesn't matter which religion, it's one. Whether or not they have their ducks in a row, totally different story. But it's one group. What needs to happen in order for that? Because if it's representative of the people who we're saying are not involved in this conversation, what then needs to be the catalyst to make that happen?
I can talk about the challenges that I see working with youth and the complexities. Why this is important is because it's young people who are the crowds when you hold demonstrations or when we talk about mass movement, even if you talk about the 90s, a lot of students, and even the fact that Sonu had to be shut down, their involvement is key. And right now when you have a lot of young people engaging for the wrong reasons. They're behind politicians, not just because of their influence, but because of the money. It's the money that it's involved in these processes. But the complexities of the youth space, which has been happening since after the Constitution, it doesn't make sense that the youth is one of the only things that is not devolved. Youth is not devolved. However, youth are in every single county in our country. Why this is difficult is because a young person in Kitui County has a completely different youth office from a young person in Busia County. You might wonder, what does that have to do with anything? It's about centering the youth. Even on the grassroots level, when young people are being managed in silos, it creates branches for them not to be able to come together. And this is funny because Makwini County, for instance, has a youth department, a youth minister, and it's one of the counties that is considered to be very youth-friendly. But you can just travel a few kilometers across, and the youth department has been clamped with agriculture or ICT or farming
Gender.
or gender. And this administration actually moved the youth and put the youth with sports. Not forgetting that 4 years ago, youth was under ICT. Not forgetting that 4 years before that, youth was under public service and gender. This is confusing even for young people in the sector like mine to mobilize young people. So I think what needs to change is for us to recognize that they've already been working around how do we separate young people. And the Universities Amendment Act was one. Young people can't vote for their leadership right now in university. And I think they practiced with youth first, and they are practicing it with the public. So they've seen if we can divide the youth, it's very
divide
easy
the public.
to divide the public.
Illegal.
Well, thank you very much, ladies, for joining us this morning. We want to continue these conversations because as this bipartisan takes place, you know it's a new term, it's a bipartisan. As it's taking place, we ought to be hearing more voices talking about the issues that really matter to the country. Wanjiru Gikonyo is an advocate for good governance and accountability, and Nerima Wako is the executive director of Siasa Place. Keep it.
This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day.